This vehicle was not able to pass Virginia State safety inspection because this left side rear tag light was out. So upon further inspection, we found out that it wasn't just the bulb. We actually have some severely corroded contacts, and some of them were so corroded away that they actually broke off. So this socket is toast. And so what I'm going to do is replace it with this socket, which is not an exact fit, but it will work. And they will be able to pass safety inspection, which is the important thing. Okay. And as you can see, these contacts are actually a much, much better shape. So the way that we're going to do this is to clip this one off, which you can see I've already done, and solder the new one on. So soldering is, by most manufacturers' standards, the best way to create a new electrical connection. If you have to splice on a new wire or splice on a new socket, then soldering is the way to go, especially if you're dealing with sensors and some other sensitive components. Tag light bulb, you could probably get away with just some crimp connectors, but we're going to go with soldering. Okay. So the first thing that we have to do is to prepare the wires to get ready to be connected. Obviously I've already stripped away the insulation on these, but there's still quite a bit of corrosion, and I really do not want to make a new connection with this nasty, horrible, corroded copper. So I'm going to go ahead and clip this off, and just make sure that you have enough wire to work with before you do this. You may have to try other methods to try to clean these off. Okay. And then you take your wire strippers. Now there's some other types that are a little bit more convenient, but I find that these are fairly accurate. So I'm going with the 18 gauge slot, and I want to make sure I take off enough insulation. So I'll say about 1/2 inch or so. Then you just pull it on through. Now we can see that there's still a little bit of corrosion here, even this far back in the wire, so unfortunately we're just going to have to deal with this. Okay, do the other side same length. Okay. Excellent. Okay. So after looking at this wire a little bit closer, I mean, you can see that even though we cut back some, it's still corroded. So that means that really the only way to 100% properly repair this vehicle would be to replace this entire wire, which is kind of ridiculous for this application. This is an older vehicle. We only need it to pass safety inspection for now. Hopefully this family will be able to get a new vehicle to take them around within the next year. So we're going to modify our repair a little bit. Okay, we're still going to use heat shrink. All right, it's always a good idea. Helps protect the connection to make sure it stays clean and dry, and also adds a little bit of extra strength to it as well. Okay. Now normally we would fan these wires out on both sides. Okay, like so. And cross them together and then twist them together. But we can't do that with this because these will all just end up breaking off. So what we're going to have to do is twist each wire individually. Okay, one, and then the other. Okay. And then we're going to twist them together. This just gives them enough strength to be able to hold themselves. Okay. So we're going to cross, and we're going to try to make sure that we twist these nice and tightly together to make as good of a connection just by twisting as possible. So we want it nice and smooth, nice and tight up against each other. Okay. So when we tug on it a little bit, it should be able to stay. Now that doesn't mean you should try to rip it apart, because obviously it will come apart, but it should just be able to retain just a little bit of pressure. Okay. So we've already got our heat shrink on there. If you don't have your heat shrink on there at this point, you better take that off and put the heat shrink on, and put it as far away from your connection as possible. Because once we start soldering, that's a lot of heat that starts to develop here, and that heat will travel upwards And then this heat shrink will start to shrink in a place where you do not want it to shrink. And then you won't be able to slide it down because it'll be stuck to the wire up here. Okay, so now let's get ready to solder. Okay, so here's your typical 120 volt plug-in soldering iron. These are pretty inexpensive and they work fairly well. You can also get a butane powered soldering iron, but those are a little bit more expensive and you have to constantly fill them up with fresh butane. One thing to make note of with any kind of soldering iron is to make sure that the tip is always clean. If you don't clean it off and you leave some residue on there, if you leave some of the solder that has melted onto the tip on there, then you're going to end up with this nice rusted, oxidized tip like we have here. So that's definitely not good. And how you clean these off after you're done is just to wipe it on the sponge, and sometimes if that's not good enough, then you can use a piece of sandpaper. Okay? Okay, so we're about to solder. We cleaned the tip off. Unfortunately, this tip is pretty much done. You can see the copper coating on it now, or the copper underside. So this tip is going to have to be replaced, but it's going to be able to work for now. So we'll just go ahead and use it. Okay. So what you want to do is you first want to tin the tip just a little bit, and so what that does is the solder that ends up on the end of the soldering iron, rosin core solder by the way, not acid core, that will melt onto the wire just a little bit, and that will help to transfer the heat from the soldering iron to the wire, and that's going to help the wire heat up faster so that we can melt the solder on top of the wire faster. Okay, so we're just gonna put a little bit on there. Okay, and we're just gonna attach our soldering iron to the wire. Now what we want to do is we do not want to keep adding solder to the tip of the soldering iron. What we want to do is heat up the wire, so we're heating the work, and add solder to the wire itself. So once the solder melts onto the wire, just like so, then that means it's ready. And we want to just kind of push the solder in. Right now it's a little bit on the bubbly side, which is not preferred. But we're just going to keep heating it up, keep that heat on there. Okay, make sure we heat it to the full length of the wire. And over time, solder's going to seep into the wire. So you'll be able to sort of actually see the shape of the strands through the solder. Okay, so before we put the heat shrink on, we just want to make sure our work is good. So the light bulb is lighting up now, and this person's going to be able to pass safety. Yay! Now that we've verified everything is good, all we have to do is take our heat shrink, slide it over top. And we're going to use a heat gun. I mean, some people will use a lighter, and I can't say that's necessarily bad. A lot of people do it. A lot of really good technicians do it. But heat gun is technically the way to go. Nice, even heat. Nothing's going to burn. And definitely if you're just starting out, you know, and you're not too familiar with the lighter, then let's just use the heat gun. Okay, so you want to heat the center first, evenly all the way around, and then work your way on to the outside. Until it's completely shrunken around the wire. Now this is not the best quality heat shrink. There is better stuff out there that actually has glue inside, and you'll be able to see the glue come out of the sides of the heat shrink. Luckily, we managed to get the heat shrink on there fairly tightly, so I won't worry about trying to secure it any further. Okay. All we have to do now is put this lens socket back in the lens, twist, turn, and tuck it nicely inside. Install little push pins. Okay, one on either side, and that's it. Voila.